The evening sky over Melbourne was painted in shades of fading orange and deepening blue, the last glow of sunlight vanishing behind the horizon. The airfield at Moorabbin Airport buzzed with the usual traffic of light aircraft, their engines growling and propellers slicing through the crisp October air. Among the pilots preparing for their flights that evening was a young man, just 20 years old, named Frederick Valentich. To his friends and family, he was Fred, a boy who had grown up with dreams larger than life. To himself, he was on the path to becoming a full-fledged commercial pilot, his passion for aviation the driving force behind every choice he made. Frederick had long been fascinated by the skies. Since childhood, he would spend hours looking upward, following the contrails of high-flying jets, listening to the distant hum of engines, and imagining himself behind the controls of a cockpit. Aviation wasn't merely a career goal for him. It was an obsession, a way of life. Those who knew him well often remarked that Fred spoke of airplanes with the kind of love and detail others reserved for family or closest friends. His bedroom was filled with aviation books, aircraft models, and flight charts, and whenever he wasn't studying, he was at the airfield, watching other pilots land and take off. By October 1978, Frederick had already accumulated a modest amount of flying experience. He was no stranger to the skies, though he was still working toward building his hours and qualifications. His instructors often described him as keen, disciplined, though perhaps at times overly enthusiastic. He wanted to prove himself, to demonstrate that he belonged in the ranks of those who flew professionally. That Saturday evening, October 21st, he signed out a Cessna 182L Skylane, a small, single-engine aircraft. The Cessna was registered as VHDSJ, a reliable high-wing mono plane, popular with student pilots and instructors alike. Fred filed his flight plan for a straightforward route, from Moorabbin to King Island, a small island off the northwestern coast of Tasmania. The purpose, according to his plan, was to pick up some friends and return later that evening. But those friends later confirmed they had not been expecting him. Why Fred filed King Island as his destination remains a mystery even to this day. Perhaps he had another reason to make the flight, something personal, something he hadn't shared. Or perhaps it was simply his way of logging hours and gaining more solo experience in the aircraft. The weather that evening was calm but not entirely perfect. A few scattered clouds drifted across the sky, and the sun's disappearance meant that Fred would be flying much of the journey in the darkness. For most seasoned pilots, this wasn't cause for concern, but for a relatively young aviator with only about 150 total hours of flying, night navigation could add stress. Nonetheless, Fred prepared with care. He checked the aircraft's fuel, inspected the control surfaces, and ran through the pre-flight checklist with steady determination. Witnesses later recalled seeing him moving with confidence, if not with an edge of nervous energy. As the Cessna's propeller roared to life, the familiar vibrations filled the cockpit. Fred called up air traffic control to report his departure. The voice that came through the headset was steady, professional, guiding him out of Moorabbin and into the open sky. For the first 20 minutes, the flight was unremarkable. He flew southward, over the darkened coastline, the lights of Melbourne twinkling behind him like distant stars, fading into the blackness of the ocean below. It was around this time that Frederick keyed his microphone and called Melbourne Air Traffic Control with a voice that seemed calm, though what he said would set the course for one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries. He reported seeing an unidentified aircraft following him. His words were specific. He said it was long. The official search stretched on for more than a week. Aircraft flew back and forth in grid patterns, their eyes scanning the dark blue surface of Bass Strait. Ships dragged nets across the waves, hoping to snag debris, but the sea kept its secrets. Not a single scrap of wreckage from the Cessna, not a cushion, not even a piece of the fuselage was recovered. For investigators, this was both unusual and troubling. Light aircraft accidents typically leave some trace: floating debris, oil slicks, personal items. In Fred's case, there was nothing. It was as if the ocean had swallowed both him and the plane whole. Melbourne Air Traffic Control submitted their recordings of the final conversation. Experts listened carefully, analyzing every word. Frederick's voice was calm at the start, but gradually his tone carried the unmistakable strain of fear. The controllers insisted that no other aircraft were in the area. Radar had shown only Fred's Cessna. But that metallic scraping noise at the end, what could it have been? Some said it was interference. Some said it was the sound of metal being crushed. Others swore it resembled the dragging of chains across steel. The recording became central to the mystery, broadcast on radio and television around the world. Australia's Department of Transport conducted its own inquiry. Their conclusion, released later, was vague. They determined that the disappearance was presumed fatal, but left the cause undetermined. They mentioned the possibility that Fred may have become disoriented while flying over water at night, leading to spatial confusion. Pilots who fly over featureless terrain or ocean at night can sometimes experience illusions, thinking they're flying straight and level when in fact they're descending. This could have led to what is called controlled flight into terrain, a crash directly into the sea. Yet, even this theory didn't explain the strange lights Fred described or the metallic noise at the end. Skeptics suggested Fred may have fabricated the UFO story as a cover. He had, after all, expressed deep belief in extraterrestrial encounters. Maybe he staged his own disappearance, some said. But those who knew Fred rejected this. He loved flying too much, loved his family too much, and how could a young man vanish completely without leaving a trace of wreckage or evidence? Other pilots were interviewed. Some said they had also seen odd lights over Bass Strait in the weeks before Fred vanished. Fishermen told stories of strange glowing objects beneath the water. A truck driver even reported seeing a green light darting across the sky near the same area that night. Whether these were coincidences or connected sightings, no one could say for sure. The UFO community seized on the case. To them, this was proof. An alien craft had intercepted Fred's Cessna, perhaps even taken him aboard. The eerie phrase, "it's not an aircraft," echoed through documentaries, books, and late-night talk shows. For believers, Fred's final words were confirmation of what governments had long denied. Australia had its own UFO abduction, as mysterious as Roswell or Rendlesham Forest. Fred's father, Guido, only fueled the speculation further. He said his son had often worried about UFOs. Fred once told his family that if he were ever confronted by extraterrestrials, he would not resist. To Guido, the disappearance was exactly what Fred had feared and expected, that his son had been taken. The Valentich family lived with that possibility for years, clinging to the hope that someday he might return. Yet, not all theories were supernatural. Some investigators suggested Fred had become distracted by lights on the ground, perhaps misidentifying the planet Venus or reflections from his own aircraft. Under stress, inexpress. Ince could have played a role. The possibility that he inverted the plane while flying and mistook his own navigation lights for an object above him was also floated. Such illusions have been documented. The Valentich disappearance was never just another missing aircraft case. It became a riddle that drew in psychologists, engineers, ufologists, and skeptics alike. In the weeks following October 21, 1978, the Australian press exploded with speculation. Headlines asked the same haunting question: what had Frederick seen? For the Department of Transport, the task was painfully clear: produce a report. The lead investigator combed through flight school records, maintenance logs, and weather data. They established that Fred's Cessna 182 was in sound condition before takeoff, with enough fuel for over 4 hours of flight. Weather over the strait that evening was calm, with only light winds. Nothing in the environment suggested catastrophe. Investigators interviewed Fred's instructors. Some painted him as an enthusiastic student, eager to fly, but one with limited experience in advanced navigation. He had logged around 150 hours, far short of the mastery required for difficult night flights over water. Spatial disorientation, they argued, could have played a role. A pilot over dark water has no horizon to guide them. The sky and sea blur together, leaving the senses vulnerable to illusions. A turn may feel like level flight, a descent like climbing. If Fred succumbed to such illusions, his Cessna could have descended into the sea without him realizing until it was too late. But psychologists examining the transcript noticed something odd. Fred remained consistent. He repeated multiple times that the object was not an aircraft. His words were not disorganized ramblings of a confused man. They were sharp, deliberate. He described green lights, movement above him, and the strange vanishing of the object only to reappear. This did not sound like a pilot lost in his own illusions. It sounded like someone describing exactly what he saw. Audio experts were brought in to airs. 2D the final recording. The metallic noise that ended the transmission puzzled everyone. Was it interference? Was it the sound of the Cessna's engine under strain? Or something mechanical happening outside the aircraft? Some even suggested the noise was consistent with electromagnetic interference, something powerful disrupting the radio waves themselves. UFO researchers seized on this immediately, calling it the signature of abduction. Meanwhile, Melbourne Air Traffic Control faced criticism. Why hadn't radar picked up another object near Fred's plane? Controllers insisted that radar only showed his Cessna. But radar in 1978 was far from perfect, especially for small or low-flying objects. It was entirely possible something had been there but escaped detection. Still, officially, there was nothing. The media latched onto the human side of the story. Interviews with Fred's family painted him as devoted, reliable, and passionate about aviation. His girlfriend spoke of his dreams of becoming a commercial pilot. His father Guido became the emotional center of the case. He repeated Fred's fears of UFOs to journalists, intensifying the legend. If it was them, Guido once said, then maybe one day he'll return. His words resonated with people who wanted to believe in the extraordinary. At the same time, skeptics sharpened their knives. They argued Fred might have staged his own disappearance, pointing to his belief in UFOs and his fascination with the topic. Could he have flown low, ditched the aircraft, and vanished? But the theory unraveled quickly. No money withdrawn, no plans made, no evidence of intent. Fred was a dreamer, yes, but a disappearing act would have required meticulous planning far beyond his means. Cinematic reconstructions of the night often depict Fred's final minutes in chilling detail. Picture the cockpit, his altimeter glowing softly, the compass steady. Outside, the endless black sea stretches in every direction. Then, a flash, green lights dancing across the horizon. Fred tilts his head upward, trying to follow it. The object moves fast. Years passed, but Frederick Valentich's name never left the lips of those who followed aviation mysteries. The Bass Strait remained a silent witness, an endless expanse of rolling, dark water where answers may still lie hidden beneath the waves. With no wreckage to recover, with no body to bury, his disappearance became less a case file and more a legend. Officially, the Department of Transport closed the file as presumed fatal accident. But even in that phrase there was no certainty, just assumption. For Fred's family, it was salt in the wound. His father Guido kept pressing the possibility that his son had not crashed, that perhaps he had been taken. His words gave believers a rallying point, and UFO groups around the world cited Fred's story as evidence of something larger than life. Meanwhile, skeptics pushed their arguments harder. Some aviation psychologists revisited the transcript and highlighted Fred's repeated references to an object hovering above. They argued that this could match the visual effects of an aircraft in a shallow turn, especially if he was disoriented. Pilots who are not instrument-rated sometimes lose their sense of horizon completely over water at night. If Fred was banking without realizing it, the navigation lights from his own Cessna could have appeared above his line of sight, giving the illusion of a separate object. This theory seemed plausible, but again, it did not explain why not a single confirmed piece of wreckage had ever been found. The ocean, of course, is vast. Currents sweep debris far away. Wreckage can sink in minutes. Yet, for those who wanted answers, the silence of the sea only deepened the mystery. Over the decades, Fred's story evolved into a cultural marker. Documentaries replayed his final words, sometimes dramatized with darkened cockpits and flashing lights. Radio shows like Coast to Coast AM revived the case. In late-night discussions of UFOs, with callers swearing they too had seen strange lights in the sky, the Valentich case became one of the rare times when mainstream aviation and fringe UFO belief collided head-on. Investigators broke down the possibilities into categories. The first, a conventional accident. Fred may have suffered spatial disorientation, flown into the sea, and the Cessna disappeared beneath the waves. Supporting this was his relative inexperience, his lack of instrument rating, and the challenge of night flying over water. Against it, however, stood his calm, detailed description of lights behaving in ways no aircraft could. The second, a hoax or staged disappearance. Some argued Fred planned to vanish, perhaps to start a new life, yet no money trail, no secret plan, and no evidence of preparation ever emerged. To stage such a disappearance with no support system seemed impossible for a 20-year-old flight student. The third, UFO encounter. This was the theory that gave the case its immortality. Fred's own words fueled it. It's not an aircraft. The metallic noise, the vanishing without wreckage, the eerie detail of green lights, all fed into the possibility of an otherworldly event. For believers, Fred was the first documented case of alien abduction in Australian skies. Finally, the fourth, military or classified encounter. Some speculated that Fred had stumbled into restricted airspace or near an experimental craft. Governments denied this, but the idea that official records might not reveal everything kept the theory alive. In every theory, there were gaps. No explanation was airtight. That is what made the case endure. Even small discoveries reignited debates. In the 1980s, when the engine cowl flap washed ashore on Flinders Island, it briefly promised resolution, but without a serial number or definitive match, it became just another ha-ha luff clue, another piece of ambiguity in a puzzle already saturated with uncertainty. Psychologists interviewed Fred's friends and instructors to understand his mindset. Was he prone to fantasy? Did he